Good afternoon, and thanks for joining me to talk about word choice today. To get us started, I'd actually like you guys to take a look at the two shapes on this screen here. One on the left looks like a series of, not quite circles, but sort of, oval-esque shapes, and then on the right you've got a more triangular shape. And then take a look at the two words at the top. Think about if you had to choose one of these two words to describe each of the shapes, which would you match with which? Which word would you choose to match with each of the shapes, A or B? If you're like most people, they actually did a study to find which people would prefer for each shape. If you're like most people, you would have chosen maluma for shape A and takiti for shape B. Now these are totally nonsense words. They don't mean anything. They're made up. But what they found was that the maluma, which sounds softer, people associated that with the circular shapes of shape A, and takiti, with its sharp T's and K's, better fit the rectangular or triangular shapes, rather, of B. So this leads us into word choice. You might try this experiment with your parents or your friends and see if they would make the same choices. Would they name shape A a maluma, shape B a takiti? When we talk about word choice, I want you guys to understand that just like symbols, authors choose words deliberately. They have every word in the dictionary to choose from, so when they make a choice, they do so deliberately. You can see the quote here by Adam Alter. It's at the top of your notes, and he wrote, "Words convey symbolic ideas beyond their meaning and carry hidden baggage that may play at least some role in shaping thought." He's a psychologist, but authors know that the specific words that they choose are not only going to convey a story, but also often convey a feeling. So we'll look at 5 ways that authors do that through their word choice and style. The most basic term for word choice is diction. And that's basically a fancy way of saying a writer's choice of words, phrases, sentence structures, and figurative language that combine to create meaning. Most often it's just a shorthand for a pattern of words that an author uses. You always use a modifier to characterize diction. So you don't just say the author uses diction. That's essentially the same thing as saying the author uses words. Instead, you want to say the author uses a diction of danger, as we saw in the Traveling Through the Dark poem, or the author uses warlike diction. Either way, you can do diction of and then a noun, or an adjective to describe the diction. Related to diction and word choice are 2 terms, the first of which is denotation. And denotation isn't very interesting. We won't talk about it a whole lot. It's simply the dictionary meaning of a word, its literal meaning. You can remember it because of the denotation in dictionary. More interesting is connotation. And that is the association or feeling that goes beyond a word's literal meaning. That gets into the feelings that the word evokes, much like you saw with the 2 shapes at the beginning. So to illustrate this point, difference between denotation and connotation, I'd like you guys to take a look at, sorry, I'm having a little PowerPoint issue here, 2 words that are on your notes sheet, house versus home. It should pop up here in just a second. But if you think about it, house versus home, they both have the same denotation. They mean a place where you live. However, if you think about it, their connotations are very different. Normally when we discuss this in class, students will say that house feels a little more impersonal. It's simply the structure in which someone lives. It's a house versus an apartment versus a mansion versus a shack. Home, however, can be anything. Home connotes a place where you feel comfortable, that you want to come home to. So they say home is where the heart is. It has more emotion to it. You have an attachment to a home. So here's an example of where the denotation of 2 words are the same, but their connotation is quite different. So authors will choose words with specific connotations. And you do say that a word connotes something. You can turn connotation into a verb. Okay, moving on. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the next terms that we will talk about. Figures of speech. It's a broad term that encompasses a lot of different word style choices. It's ways of using language that deviate from the literal, denotative meanings and suggest something beyond themselves. Metaphor is a figure of speech that makes a comparison between two unlike things without using like or as. Personification is a form of metaphor in which human characteristics are attributed to non-human things. And simile is a figure of speech that makes an explicit comparison between two things by using like, as, appears, or seems. Again, I'm pretty sure that that's a review. So just to show that you understand all of these terms, when you finish these notes, I'd like you guys to take a second to write an example of denotation, and then for connotation, list two words that are similar but have different connotations, and explain the connotations of those words. Finally, think of an example of each of these three figures of speech: an original metaphor, an example of personification, and an original simile. Okay, you might want to do that after our next activity. I would simply like you guys to go ahead and flip over your notes, and you should find, let me pull it up here, the close read passage that you got in class today. I'd like to take some time to go through this passage and show how Lessing is using some of these word choice concepts in her own piece. So give it just a second to pull up, maybe. And I'm going to walk you guys through a guided practice, observing some word choices that she makes for the story Through the Tunnel, some of which we talked about in our discussion in class today. So here we have our guided practice word choice passage, exactly from the story that you guys read last night. So I'd like to take a second to walk you through some things that the author is doing here, noticing her denotation, connotation, and figures of speech that she's using to develop the meaning of the story. So you guys got the idea that this story was about the transition from childhood to adulthood. The tunnel serving as a threshold into this new world where he's going to be more on his own. So let's dig into these three paragraphs. She writes, "He ran straight into the water and began swimming. He was a good swimmer. He went out fast over the gleaming sand, over a middle region where rocks lay like discolored monsters under the surface. And then he was in the real sea, a warm sea, where irregular cold currents from the deep water shocked his limbs." In this paragraph, two word choice elements stand out to me. We have a simile here with like discolored monsters under the surface. So I can label that. And then another word that sticks out to me is the verb shocked. Because what you guys noticed very rightly in our discussion was that the beach was a very safe place for Jerry. So here, this verb connotes something violent. So I might simply label it violent diction. This simile up here, of course, comparing it to discolored monsters, helps convey the danger of the bay versus the comfort and safety of the beach. Moving on to the next paragraph. When he was so far out that he could look back not only on the little bay, but past the promontory that was between it and the big beach, he floated on the buoyant surface and looked for his mother. There she was, a speck of yellow under an umbrella that looked like a slice of orange peel. He swam back to shore, relieved at being sure she was there, but all at once, very lonely. Interesting to me here is his word speck to describe his mother. Speck, in terms of diction, connotes something insignificant. So we see that his mother is becoming less important to him now. He's embarrassed that he feels like a little child compared to the other boys that he saw. And we get another simile, like a slice of orange peel. So to compare his mother to a slice of orange peel is to, again, make her insignificant, make her something that is not important. And that would fit with the idea that he needs to break away from her and mature. So let's look at the next paragraph. On the edge of a small cape that marked the side of the bay, away from the promontory, was a loose scatter of rocks. Above them, some boys were stripping off their clothes. They came running, naked, down to the rocks. The English boy swam toward them, but kept his distance at a stone's throw. They were of that coast. All of them were burned, smooth dark brown, and speaking a language he did not understand. To be with them, of them, was a craving that filled his whole body. He swam a little closer. They turned and watched him with narrowed, alert, dark eyes. Then one smiled and waved. It was enough. In a minute he had swum in and was on the rocks beside them, smiling with a desperate, nervous supplication. They shouted cheerful greetings at him, and then, as he preserved his nervous and uncomprehending smile, they understood that he was a foreigner strayed from his own beach, and they proceeded to forget him. But he was happy. He was with them. Here what stands out to me is her description of the burned, smooth, dark brown to describe their skin. For me, that's imagery which we haven't talked a whole lot about, but we did discuss the mother's white arm. So here, her word choice emphasizes the idea of heat and darkness compared to the whiteness of his mom. I also make note of the noun, craving that filled his whole body. A craving is usually something that's associated with food, but it also becomes a need. Okay, something that you've just got to have. It's interesting that it's a craving for him to be with these other boys and away from his mom. Moving on to the last paragraph. They began diving again and again from a high point into a well of blue sea between rough, pointed rocks. After they had dived and come up, they swam around, hauled themselves up, and waited their turn to dive. They were big boys, men, to Jerry. He dived, and they watched him. And when he swam around to take his place, they made way for him. He felt he was accepted, and he dived again, carefully, proud of himself. There's not a whole lot going on in this paragraph, but one thing does stand out to me, and that is her decision to put this word carefully in here to describe Jerry's actions and how he dives. Because we know that what he eventually does in trying to swim through the tunnel is very much the opposite of careful. So the fact that she chooses this modifier, this adverb, shows that Jerry is very early in his journey toward being able to make that transition. So he's still cautious. Okay. So we see a series of word choices that Lessing has made that subtly hint at some of the things that we understand better once we've read the whole story. So now you guys can take a look at the independent practice passage that's toward the end of the book, and I'd like you to make at least 4 observations of word level, word choice selections that Lessing has made, and comment on how they might be significant. How might they help reinforce this idea of a character transitioning from childhood to adulthood? Thank you very much, and have a great night.